Our headlines today. Broken-hearted, the family of 15-year-old Elian Andam was fatally stabbed on her way to school. Attend a vigil in her memory and say they're overwhelmed with grief.
The UK is on track for record tax levels, says a leading economic think tank, the highest since the Second World War.
Unions are calling for an emergency meeting of ministers to discuss the future of the HS2 high-speed rail link.
These plastics are part-way through being recycled here at this factory in Newcastle, but tons and tons of plastic ends up in landfill every year. I have the details of a new single-use plastics ban for England that takes effect from this weekend.
Donor children will have the right to know their donor's identity for the first time from this weekend, thanks to a change in the law.
Good morning. Golf's greatest rivalry is ready to rumble in Rome. Passions are sky high with the start of the Ryder Cup just minutes away now, with Team Europe looking to reclaim the trophy they lost in the USA 2 years ago.
And I'm in amongst the dahlias, but not probably where you'd expect. We're in Stonehenge this morning. I'll tell you why I'm here.
Let's have a look at your papers for Friday morning.
We start with the picture of Elian Andam, the 15-year-old girl killed in a stabbing in Croydon. It appears on many of today's front pages. The Daily Mirror quotes Elian's aunt saying she went to school and didn't come home.
Times leading on the story we were talking about a moment ago. The Institute for Fiscal Studies found that tax rises introduced by the Conservatives since the last election will be equivalent of £3,500 per household by the next election.
Let's take a look at the Telegraph. It says councils will be stopped from introducing new 20-mile-per-hour zones under a plan for motorists set to be unveiled by the Prime Minister at this weekend's Conservative Party conference.
And then in The Guardian, they feature an image of that famous 300-year-old sycamore gap tree, which was felled. We know now a 16-year-old boy has been arrested. We're there this morning throughout the programme, looking at that story in a little more detail.
Yeah, a story that's affected a lot of people, I think, in a quite profound way. The Harry Potter co-star, if we just look at this picture here, Sir Michael Gambon, lots of people paying tribute after his death, aged 82.
Yes, he played Dumbledore in 6 of the films, of course. Daniel Radcliffe said the brilliant, effortless actor loved his job, never seemed defined by it. Emma Watson also thanking Sir Michael for showing us what it looks like to wear greatness lightly. So many, many tributes coming in to Sir Michael Gambon.
Yeah, indeed. Anything else in the papers?
Well,
I
was just on the film theme. There's a story about The Sound of Music. Now, Christopher Plummer, of course, did you like The Sound of Music?
Loved it.
Everybody's watched The Sound of Music. Now, it never really occurred to me before, and possibly it's obvious, that he didn't sing his own songs in the film.
I did not know
because
that.
his voice was deemed not to be good enough. I didn't know that either, but he didn't. He died in 2021. But a new version of The Sound of Music is being brought out, in which you will, for the first time, be able to hear his version of The Sound of Music songs, because they were recorded, but not deemed to be sufficiently good to be released in the film.
How fascinating.
So there'll be the actual version will have the one you've heard before, but also his voice. But apparently, when he was told he wasn't going to be allowed to put his voice out, he flew into a rage, in his own words, and he said, or the only reason he did the film in the first place was that he'd be allowed to sing. These are his words. He says, he was miserable to work with on set because I was furious they wouldn't let me sing on the film or its soundtrack. I'd worked on my singing voice for so long in those days, they'd have someone trained who'd do it for you. He said, the only reason I did this bleep thing was so I could do a musical on stage, on film. He was livid. And now we get the first chance to hear his voice, which apparently is rather delicate and rather delightful, but just not deemed good enough for The Sound of Music.
So we can all judge for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, OK.
Let's take a look on what's on the front of this morning's papers. She was the light of our lives. The Metro reports on the death of Elian Andam, stabbed to death on her way to school. The Mirror also leads with that emotional tribute from Elian's family, as does The Sun. The I reports that private schools plan to use a loophole to avoid Labour's proposed VAT charge. The Times reports that since 2019, the Conservatives have introduced more tax rises than any other government. The Prime Minister is facing calls to ditch European courts, according to the Express. Meanwhile, The Guardian says the Prime Minister is putting car drivers first in new election battle line ahead of an announcement on Monday. The Daily Telegraph also leads with the Prime Minister's new plans for drivers, saying Sunak to block new 20-mile-per-hour zones. The Financial Times reports OpenAI is in talks with IBM and SoftBank to design ChatGPT creators' first device. Moronic reads the front of the Mail as it reports on the felling of Britain's most photographed tree. And The Star has a story about Sharon Osbourne, whose son Jack claims she was nearly killed by an evil spirit that ended up putting her in hospital. And if you want to see any of those front pages again or read the stories, just scan the QR code on your screen.